So the topic that we're going to be exploring, how SHAPE Research and Ventures can help tackle the UK's social and economic challenges, and we're not short of those, so there'll be plenty to get our teeth into. I've got a fantastic panel. Hugh Vasey, Deputy Director for Innovation, Business Engagement and Commercialisation at the ESRC, Dr. Ashmita Randhawa, Director of R&D at Sunderland Software City, Dr. Shera Abdul Rahman, who's Senior Lecturer in Innovation and Entrepreneurship at Oxford Brookes University, and Tony Sotorio, Director of Commercialisation at UKRI. So what I was going to do, we're not going to have formal presentations, but I thought I'd just ask each person to briefly introduce themselves, situate kind of where they're coming from, and also to give us a challenge and an opportunity that they see in this landscape. Once we do that, I might ask a couple of questions to the panel, and then we'll open up and have plenty of interaction from you as well. So, Hugh, let's kick off with you.
Okay, good morning all of you. So I'm Hugh Vasey, Deputy Director at ESRC. The work I do tends to cut across 4 areas. So we do innovation, particularly around how we build a research-led R&D system, which is no small challenge in itself. We also do work on what I call impact infrastructure, so that's things like the IAAs, Celebrating Impact Prize, and then we do business engagement and commercialisation for social science. So the latter is obviously most relevant today. And an opportunity and a challenge. I guess the challenge first is how do we, so we've had an incredible 5 years or so in SHAPE commercialisation, really building out from pretty much nothing. My challenge is how do we build it to the next stage? An opportunity for SHAPE. I think what we've really done here is develop particularly interesting stuff. So there's systems and process innovation. That's one half of it. You know, that low IP innovation. But also we've developed a budding area in what I'd call social value commercialisation. So that's commercialisation essentially for social and economic good. And that's a huge opportunity, and it's one that we've got to keep growing, and there are lots of avenues we could do that, missions, industrial strategy, but also building up that investor base. So, you know, there is room to grow for the SHAPE commercialisation ecosystem.
I don't know how to follow up from that. Morning everyone, I'm Ashmita Randhawa. I'm Director of R&D at an organisation called Sunderland Software City, which works to grow the ecosystem of tech businesses in the northeast of England. And we do this through 4 strands of work focused on helping businesses either adopt advanced digital technology through partnerships with organisations like the Hartree Centre or the Digital Catapult, but equally working with organizations to help them think about the capabilities they're going to need for their workforces as they think about the adoption of this technology. We also work on commercialization strategies and how we grow a stock of tech businesses within the region, but then also providing business support to those organizations that are already operating in a space where digital adoption was something that they had to do to survive through the COVID years, but now really it's an opportunity for them to thrive. My other hats, and potentially the reason why it's relevant, my being on here is I'm also an honorary research fellow at an employment-focused research centre at the University of Oxford called the Scope Research Centre, where we really look at the routes into the labour market and thinking about the role of research and innovation and what that does in terms of skills formation. I think and I think it's also well worth highlighting, I was on cohort 1 of the ARC accelerators, so lived and breathed through this and sort of have really had to think about what it means to try and spin out something that's based on a project that's in the social sciences. So I feel your pain for those who have gone through it. We didn't have a chance to spin out successfully, but learned a lot through the way. And so if anybody wants to have a conversation of that, absolutely happy to. I think the challenge that I see, and I've been coming to reSHAPE now This is now my third year here. I've attended and moderated. I'm now, privileged to sit on a panel. I think the challenge that we have is how do we make this conversation more mainstream? It still very much sits within the realms of these disciplines only. How do we start to get the conversation beyond the SHAPE disciplines? How do we engage across the other disciplines so that the impact that we're wanting to make, particularly when you think of the role that tech can play in some of these commercialization pieces, how do we get that to come together? Then equally, opportunity is, I think there's a growing community. This just gets bigger and bigger every year, and it's fantastic to see the number of ventures that have spun out of these disciplines. And I think that's an opportunity we need to capitalize on more, on how we actually shout about that a little bit more, talk about what the challenges are that are being solved, and really sort of be advocates ourselves rather than just depending on one organization to do it.
My name is Shera Abdul Rahman, or most of you know me as Shera. I am a senior lecturer in innovation and entrepreneurship at Oxford Brookes, and also a co-investigator of Innovation and Research Caucus. And we work very closely with ESRC. So I've been working with the likes of Hugh and team, looking at the challenges and opportunities in commercialization of SHAPE subjects. So I guess that sort of helps me to answer the next question. In terms of challenge first, I think I've been privileged in my role to be able to speak to actors in the entire ecosystem. So whether it's academics or research councils or knowledge exchange professionals. And I think the challenge still lies on culture. So there is a lack of awareness among decision makers especially. So either at departmental level of the university or central university, and all the way to funders, whether it's private or public. So there is that issue of understanding the potential that SHAPE commercialization can bring. The opportunity, however, because I have been speaking to people in the environment, I know that it has grown, as what Ashmita said, massively. And I think that is being assisted by the fact that there is an increasing need for showing or demonstrating social impact from various actors, and that has resulted in a realization that SHAPE commercialization or SHAPE disciplines are able to sort of feed into that conversation as well. So that's my bit. I'll pass on to Tony.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, yeah. A real pleasure to be here this morning, so thank you. Lots of energy, which is fantastic. So my name's Tony Sotirio. I'm Director of Commercialisation for UK Research and Innovation. So I work obviously with Hugh, but also we work right across UKRI to do sort of three things, sort of three pillars. So the first is how can UKRI work with partners to try and incentivize and reward commercialization across the ecosystem. The second is looking at our own direct sort of portfolio of funding and support, and how we can improve that, make it more joined up across the disciplines and interdisciplinary to provide a better continuum of funding. We know there's lots of gaps within UKRI funding still, if you look at, so that's one of the things. And the third one third pillar is how do we make sure we have the evidence and UKRI can be a real advocate for the strength of commercialization. Obviously, one of the key audiences of that is central government, but of course it's much wider. It's the public and government as well. In terms of sort of opportunities and sort of challenges, so I think opportunity, first of all, so I've been at UKRI for 4 years now, and I safely say that I think we've got such a golden opportunity over the next few years, given the level of recognition of the role and the importance of commercialization, also of knowledge exchange and translation. Just to say that as well, because I know we're talking about commercialization here, but very much to understand that there's there's interrelationship between those three activities. But I think that, so I don't think there's one meeting between UKRI and government and Patrick Vallance, for example, ministers, where commercialization isn't mentioned. So, and that's also the same at UKRI board level, chief exec. So a real focus on the need for UKRI to help create a step change in commercialization and the importance. Fantastic opportunity. I think the challenge is obviously the overall fiscal environment. We all know that. I think we obviously need to, as we always do, and it's part of our day jobs within UKRI, but we need to work with the community to really demonstrate the value of R&D, but also in this case particularly commercialization, and how absolutely it chimes with the government's key missions, but also societal issues and what people every day see as their issues, such as cost of living and that sort of thing.
Brilliant, thank you. Well, look, one of the things I'd like to start with, given we've got two funders on the panel, is the role of funding. And Tony, I might come back first to you and then to Hugh, and then I'll ask the others for their input from a kind of from the outside, as it were. Where do you see the gaps? Where do you see what's already working in the funding system?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think where it does work is that sort of mixed economy of funding models, I think. So I'm a real strong believer that I think if you're within an institution, you should have access to both institutional held funding as well as perhaps larger scale responsive program funding. And I think actually with ESRC and SHAPE, actually that community is actually looking across UKRI. Take my word for it, you're actually in quite a good position. Still gaps, there's still lots to do, I think, not least level of funding, but I think there are some more gaps in other disciplines, for example, than there can be within SHAPE. But I think first of all, that's I think really key to make sure that, and I think that, and the reasons for that is that the funding can work slightly differently. We need funding that can be quick to access, relatively as least bureaucratic as you can make for accessing funding, but you also need perhaps larger scale funding where there is a slightly higher bar in terms of, because it's public funding at the end of the day, and it's perhaps milestone driven and that sort of thing. And I think a combination of both. So what I'm trying to do is make sure across all the disciplines there is that access. I think scale of funding is still, UKRI still spends quite a small percentage of overall funding in KE translation and commercialisation. So I think there's still a big opportunity to think about how do we increase that across the disciplines.
Brilliant, thank you. Hugh?
Yeah, so to add to what Tony said, rather than to recover the same areas, I think what we've found for ESRC, particularly over the growth of SHAPE commercialisation, is the role of a funder is what internally in UKRI we talk about a funder plus model. So what we actually mean by that is that we don't just give you money and tell you to get on with it. We catalyse and we convene a community as well. So that's very much been the case with SHAPE commercialisation. We put money out through the IAAs in form of cross-funding originally. We gave a little bit of extra money to the Aspect Network when they were in flight to take ARC out of England, because it was Research England funded. But we've also done things like we had a practice oral community of practice, and now that's become a much wider social value commercialisation community practice that's run by Arnie King as from Praxis, but as a joint venture. So that's really how we've approached this. The money is almost secondary. I'm sure you guys will not agree with that, but for us, it's doing all the stuff around it. And I think the other thing, particularly in commercialisation, that's been really important, and for you, those of you who are academics and have gone through commercialisation, I'm sure you'd agree with this. If we just gave that money to academics as a standard grant, it would not have the effect it has. It's support that's given by those in research office, in TTO office, in KE offices, and through organisations like ARC and Zinc, who've supported us on various things, that really makes a difference. So it's that full systems approach. Funding is part of it, but it's not all of it. And really, it's because everybody here has so enthusiastically taken on this opportunity that it actually works.
Brilliant, thank you. And now, more from a kind of external perspective, Ashmita, do you want to go first? And then
I was actually looking at Shera if she's got...
Okay, Shera, go on.
Okay, well, I wasn't put on the spot or anything. I think, just adding on to this as well, I was thinking about the fact that funding has grown actually massively for SHAPE commercialization over the years. And I think there could be an increasing amount of more interesting things happening as well. For example, interdisciplinary funding, flexible funding options, and also targeted funding in terms of resolving specific societal issues as well. because I think when you just target SHAPE commercialization, which is great, but I think there are more that SHAPE commercialization can do. And I think it's bringing that conversation about what kind of impact can SHAPE commercialization bring. So you start bringing that conversation at the forefront. So for example, the healthy aging catalyst was a great example of this. And there's many more types of sort of societal grand challenges whereby if it is given to both, equally for both STEM commercialization or SHAPE commercialization, or not seeing them as competing, but as dense partners. I think encouraging that kind of conversation can also be really helpful in terms of bringing SHAPE commercialization forward.
Really looking from the real outside in, right? I think the funding still seems very convoluted and slow in many ways in terms of the pace that sometimes these things need to move at, particularly when academics are looking to partner with external businesses or innovate within that wider ecosystem. It can get quite tricky, particularly for small businesses to engage with academics in a meaningful way, because no business is going to wait 6 months for funding, answer to come back to an academic. It moves a lot faster than that cycle necessarily moves sometimes. And to just build on what Shera said, I think having that challenge-led approach is something that we keep forgetting, and we end up becoming either tech-focused or SHAPE-focused or STEM-focused. And it's almost like we need to move on from a lip service to interdisciplinarity and encourage that a bit more, even from a funding perspective. And the third point I wanted to make was, I think potentially looking at funding models from different spaces, like looking at the actual development sector, looking at things like social impact bonds, development impact bonds, and starting to think about that outcome-led funding model, which will then encourage us to, think about value beyond economic jobs or GVA or, things like that added, because it's being slightly more tangential in our thinking around how to crack that on funding. We just can't keep doing the same old all the time.
Yeah, and look, this leads nicely. You've almost set me up very nicely. Those of you who've been paying attention to the spending review will have seen that Patrick Vallant's got £25 million for mission R&D funding. And this is exactly, what you've just been, you've almost given the brief that he wants, which is challenge-led. One assumes that it will be, X millions against each of the 5 government missions. And the whole idea is that this will be quick funding, enabling solutions to kind of come from wherever they can be. And I'm really interested, you've already given the example of social impact bonds, but it seems to me this kind of funding doesn't have to be designed as in the kind of mechanism that we've traditionally used. So, ideas or thoughts about where we should draw from.
Can I give an example?
Yeah, please.
So I did talk about the development impact bond, an example of that, and I know that's not necessarily a SHAPE venture, right? But, there's this example of a non-profit in India called Educate Girls, and it was an example of the first education impact bond. And, the result has been the government and the state governments in India actually having conversations around number of girls actually staying in school. And those are the outcomes that they're measured on, not how much money they're making or what they're adding to the economy in that direct way, right? And so it's led to some really, really good, firm discussions. And more sort of closer to home, if I were to think about the Northeast, right? Currently, we've just had devolution. There's a lot more devolved power in the regions, and you've got combined authorities that have a bit more flexible funding and are hungry to sort of try new things and pilot new activities. So, the Northeast Combined Authority, for example, has partnered with us because we've all heard the adage the tech sector has a shortage of experienced individuals, but no one in the tech sector is willing to give them their first job. So how do you get that? How do you break that, right? So, the Combined Authority is piloting something with us where we've essentially taken on 10 developers for 6 months to get them that experience, to work with companies, to give them the work experience in us. And success for us means they're not with us in 6 months' time, right? We've already had 2 offered jobs, 2 have gone, 2 have already been offered jobs, and great, they're now, that's a model that works because the tech sector. But that takes some brave thinking. It takes people going, we're going to try something different and not just do same old, same old.
Tony, Hugh, you must be thinking about this mission funding. Have you got early ideas on how this could be structured and worked?
So first of all, I think the missions are exactly what you said. Is a great opportunity for the SHAPE community, I think, really. because I think the way they're being thought of at the moment is that sort of problem, starting off with the problem. So if people who know about the mission, so obviously there's sort of, each of the missions have a board, and the boards have been asked to come up with key sort of problem statements. And then UKRI is working with chief scientific advisors in each department to turn them into something that's sort of tractable and sort of research focused. But looking at those sort of initial sort of problem statements, that is a great opportunity for that real interdisciplinary, really novel approach to, let's start off with how do we crack that problem rather than, perhaps more traditional sort of discipline, sort of siloed approach. So first of all, I think that is a great opportunity. Obviously, we need to we're still having conversations at UKRI with government about what the structure. There may not be a single structure across the missions. Again, that also provides opportunity, I think, to try different things. But yeah, I do think it's a great opportunity for SHAPE to make a real impact. And I think the government really is key about thinking about if you look at the missions, as you know, a lot of them are social focused. Yes, we're actually quite lucky that the economic mission drives through everything we do, particularly in commercialisation. It's almost just a tick there. But I think the challenge here is that, and the opportunity is they really are social impact focused. So it's, I think, a great opportunity for us to demonstrate, yes, we can do both, tick, tick, I think.
Brilliant. Anyone else want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting where the missions will land. I think we're working through that process now. And obviously we're well placed. I mean, commercialisation is a way to do rapid scaling of impactful research. Ultimately, that's how we see it, and that's something the missions will need. Whether we'll see that in what they're calling phase 1 or phase 2, couldn't tell you yet. But it's certainly something I've flagged up that we can do that. We already have a SHAPE catalyst, and we can develop that in a way that could have a mission focus. So lots happening in this. One thing we found out from Shera's research, amongst other way of doing it ourselves, is that a mission is a really good thing for people who are commercialisation skeptics to grab hold of, because then it becomes about the ultimate impact. And actually commercialisation, in our way of softening it, we talk about sustaining and scaling impact. And then we're not worried about the vehicle you use to get there. We're keen that you get there. And I like the idea about outcome-led funding. I might borrow that phrase.
No worries.
Yeah.
It's not mine, but it is from Social Impact World.
Shera, anything you want to add on this?
No, I think that's great. Yeah.
Super. Good. All right. Well, look, let's open up now. We'll take some questions from the floor. Let's take maybe a batch of 3, and then we'll come back to the panel. So, let me repeat that back. You may not have quite caught it. There's slight overhead noise in the room. So, in terms of the kind of bringing SHAPE and STEM communities together, how can we prime people to do that? Is that kind of getting the gist of it? Yeah. And then we had questions around both the kind of level of overheads on grants and then kind of what's happening to full economic costing. So I might come to the two of you about the grants questions, and then all of you can contribute on the wider points. So
I'm happy to take that first hit. So yeah, FEC, sometimes referred to as FEC, which I always find quite amusing. Is and overheads. Okay, so all I can say is it's a known issue. Some of you, or many of you, will probably know Mel Netch, my predecessor as Deputy Director at ESRC. She's on the case. That's her new job, to look at this. It is a profoundly complicated situation to fix. There are multiple actors and multiple things working in this where there's different pools. There's researchers who obviously want to see more of that money. There's universities who are under kind of historic levels of financial pressure at the moment. And then there's what a funder like us wants to do, where ideally it would all go to the research and innovation, and we wouldn't be worrying about the other stuff. But that's not, I guess, the social contract that's historically been there between the funders and research institutions. That social contract has never been written down, so everybody has a slightly different idea of what it should be, and that's where the complication is. But I can't think anyone better than Mel to be working on that problem and doing our best to find innovative solutions.
Thanks. Tony?
Yeah, so just building on that, I agree. I think, so UKRI, I think, obviously has an integral but complicated role with this, because even within UKRI, there are, as you quite rightly said, there's a couple of different focus of priorities. So we've got Research England, one of the reasons is to help the sustainability of the higher education system in England, working with the old administrations, etc. as well. So that's one side, and as you quite rightly said, you've got research councils who need to do it in a sustainable way, but perhaps more focused on the sort of the researcher, the direct researcher relationship, as I can't remember the word you said, but that contract. So the good thing about UKRI is that allows us to try and balance those, and there aren't going to be easy answers, and there are some difficult choices for UKRI in how do we use our funding to tip both those boxes in terms of sustainability. Obviously, I mean, I would counter that obviously if organisations go out of business and they shut departments, that isn't going to help research in the long term and isn't going to help UK PLC in the long term. So it is a question of balance, and I don't think there is an easy answer. There is a balance. Obviously, we want research funding to provide the biggest bang for its buck in terms of what we buy from that research funding, but we do need to do it in a sustainable way. So I think it's so as you said, Mel, absolutely, and we have got a team at UKRI looking at this issue, but I don't think it's going to be an easy answer. There's not going to be a single answer, an easy answer. And there may be some difficult choices in terms of, absolutely, what do we fund as UKRI, and what's something we do? Do we fund less projects, but do it in a more sustainable way, or what? So those are kind of really difficult decisions that I think we're having to work through with government at the moment.
Yeah, and I mean, clearly, bigger picture of on Monday there was a kind of review of higher education announced in terms of a need for efficiencies and so forth, and depending on quite how that plays out, it seems to me this is a sort of sub-question of that, right? Exactly. Because depending on where government pushes on some of those questions, in particular, to the extent that universities are a marketplace and one allows one to fold, if you're going to stay in that kind of world, then you need probably to move towards higher levels of full economic costing, because you want to protect the research base even if that were to happen. But at the moment it's such a higgledy-piggledy model where everything is being cross-subsidised by everything else, and I mean in some ways international students cross-subsidises the whole thing, right? So anyway, should we turn to the two of you, and Ashmita, you look like you want to come in on this question of building partnerships.
STEM and SHAPE, I suppose. So I'm an engineer turned social scientist. My background is I'm a biomedical engineer, right? And I worked in corporate R&D for many years. And I think I'm going to come back to the statement that we made before, which is about if we're challenge-led, you're going to automatically start to bring those networks and communities together. So bear with me on what I'm about to say next. So I used to work for Procter & Gamble, right? A fast-moving consumer goods company. I was a formulation scientist. I used to design the formulas for your dishwashing tablets, right? I wouldn't design something just for the sake of designing it, right? There was an entire community within the R&D organization whose entire job was steeped in the social sciences. It was about going and finding out those consumer insights, those needs. What is it that my consumer wants at the end of the day? If I'm not solving her challenge, what am I designing for? What am I using science to actually design for, right? Now, obviously, there's also the, you'd have different levels of R&D, where you would have the scientists who were just trying new things and trying to break the mold. But ultimately, it was challenge-led, right? And so the moment you come back to framing it around a challenge, you start to bring those communities together, because you're requiring to come at it from different angles for it to be a successful project, but equally to scale for impact, because otherwise your impact is going to be a lot more minimal. I don't know if that's translated right, but hopefully you get what I'm trying to say there in terms of you can't have one without the other. Right?
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. In industry, this separation between STEM and SHAPE doesn't exist. In industry, STEM, science and social science, they're always working together. But obviously we have disciplines for a reason. And I think from my research, universities who have been quite innovative in commercialization have actually initiated those conversations from a problem statement. So from a societal problem statement. I'm in some of the networks myself, and I see conversations being had between different types of academics, somebody from engineering, somebody from biomed, and somebody from maybe history. all talking about how to solve, for example, ethics of AI. And when you lead with a problem, nobody is saying, hey, I'm from engineering, this is my background. They're more saying, like, how do we bring the solution forward? How do we apply for funding together? What does good look like? What is the solution? Who can we partner with? Because in my research, having looked into the impact, the economic impact, in fact, of SHAPE studies, I found that nearly all impact case studies they achieve impact through partnerships. So it's not just between STEM or SHAPE; it's also between academics and non-academics and external actors out there. Because if you're not talking to people outside of academia, you do not know what they need. So all the ventures that we heard in a previous session as well, you can hear it. They all talk about, so what is the solution we're bringing? Who is actually using this knowledge? And that partnership is what we need to encourage, whether it goes way beyond discipline. It actually involves non-academics as well.
And just to mention a couple of British Academy funding structures, which, they're not exactly answering this question, but may inspire kind of other models. One is our innovation fellowships, which allow an academic to work with a policy institution or a cultural institution for a year, fully funded, and that's been really successful both within government and across a wide range of organisations. The other is our pump priming scheme, which gives £10,000 for people who want to apply to Horizon Europe, and the £10,000 is to develop your partnerships before you put in an application. And in a way, I think coming back to your original question, does one need something like that so that people are ready for when a bid actually is asked for? Okay, let's take another round of questions. Yep.
Great. Thank you, everyone. Great conversations. I wanted to pick up on something you said very briefly, Hugh. You said something about the power of funding to lead to the rapid commercialization of research. And I wanted to ask why the rapidity is necessary. I think one of the things that distinguishes SHAPE commercialization is these disciplines focus on the deep-rooted, sticky, hard-to-fix problems, the systemic things that are not easy to fix, particularly through the existing models we have of enterprises. And speaking from my own experience, the models we design are actively pushing back against those existing models that can't solve the problem. So I don't think rapidity is particularly possible, and it might mean that actually SHAPE commercialization requires longer-term support to recognise that it's the depth of impact that matters, and there might be a longer incubation period that protects the new models as they build potentially towards scale, but recognising that actually using the unique comparative advantage of social science research is what's going to transform the world, not making sure that it fits into a high profit or easily scalable business. I think that's really important to get the SHAPE commercialization right.
So if I just repeat back, especially for those who might not quite have heard, and check I've got the idea, where we're dealing with complex, wicked problems, is commercialization kind of rapidly actually the right model, as it were? Yeah, okay, good. Suddenly several hands. So let's go 1, 2, 3. We'll take all three of these and then, yep. Great. We've got a nice set of questions there. I'll just recap. Is rapid commercialization sort of, in a sense, not the right approach where we have these kind of complex, wicked problems, but also there's a question which links, which is actually, is it not rapid enough, partly because of the funding mechanisms? There's the question of how do we create a sustainable sector in this space and the issues around procurement. Question, I think, about how do we ensure that basic research also has a journey to commercialization as well, not forgetting about that. And then finally, and perhaps a kind of overarching one, is just, is our risk appetite far too low in this whole space? And if so, what could be done about it? So you don't need to answer all of those. And maybe I'll start with you, Tony, and then kind of work along.
Brilliant. Okay, so not really good question. I haven't spent too long answering them all. But so first of all, what really strikes me here is obviously I'm absolutely passionate about the need for discipline-focused answers to questions and issues. But one thing that really strikes me, and also in my role, is actually there's often more similarities across some of the issues, actually. And I think so a lot of these questions, I think, absolutely can be applied to all startups and all spin-outs and all commercialization. So I think it's really interesting. So first of all, I think about rapidity, commercialization isn't rapid I would challenge it's not in the private sector either. So if you take medical research, we know it takes about 15 years from a drug being designed to hitting the market, and that's mostly done in the private sector. So lots of reasons for that. I'm not saying that's perfect, but so I think we do need to absolutely, and I don't want to speak for you, we need to try and speed that up. And obviously that's a great way to impact onto the economy is by shortening the time for commercialisation. So I think absolutely the point's taken about how do we speed up our funding, how do we make sure there's no gaps in funding, and all those sorts of things can play a role. But I think you're absolutely right. What we need to do, back to one of my pillars, is we need to convince government and the public that actually you need to look long term to understand the impacts for commercialisation and also R&D, I think. And one of the ways you do that is having very unideal proxy measures of success that aren't really about impact. They are just sort of almost tick box exercises like, patents or even spin-outs being formed is not a measure of impact. But I think we need to do that to try and balance that argument, but make the argument about that you need to look at the longer term to really understand about both economic and social impacts, I think.
I wanted to add to that in terms of thinking about the value added. I think the third sector is a really good place to look at how to measure value when it's not immediate economic value. So, there's, for example, social return on investment, social value added, for example. There's so much for us to learn in different types of industries. There's also things like ESG movement, and UN SDG, where we can learn what is actually happening in terms of capturing those sort of non-economic and non-short-term economic impact. And in most cases, they will say it needs a lot of stakeholder engagement. It needs a lot of understanding what does value mean for these different actors in order for you to actually put some assumption of an economic value for the social impact. In terms of risk, I wanted to answer in terms of risk. When I started, I think we were very, very low risk. That was about 4 years ago. And the fact that when I started, I think only 12 universities were sort of dabbling into SHAPE, and now it's about 48. If you look at aspect projects, so not yet ventures, there's more than 500 right now. So I think it's true if we compare to maybe STEM, that we are a bit more low risk, but STEM also has a much longer history of commercialization. So you're comparing 30 years versus 5 years. So if you change your mindset like that, I think the risk-taking that UK is doing is quite high, actually. What I would like to happen next is actually to spread awareness to non-public funding community. So I think that's the bit where they need to take more risk on. So private investors are still completely unaware what SHAPE commercialization looks like, and they need to understand what value can it bring to the market. And in terms of talking about sort of the speed of commercialization, I also agree with Tony. Actually, if you look at private sector in terms of the commercialization they do, where it involves really radical innovation, it does take as long. So it is about sort of understanding that the commercialization in private sector, there's a variety of it, and some of them are a lot faster because they don't do the same kind of commercialization as universities do, which tend to be very blue sky thinking and very radical innovation. Can I add one more? And the other thing that I wanted to say is that often academics tell me, how can I commercialize? I said, it's not that we're there trying to say everybody should commercialize, but it is to give option and to think about the fact that even if you're doing blue sky thinking, what you commercialize is not going to look the same as what you publish. So picking out of that knowledge that you found, what are the ones that can actually resolve a problem? So it will look completely different as well. So we do need that blue sky thinking. We do need those radical research at the same time as those more applied research as well.
Thank you.
It's like Shera and I wrote each other's points. I want to come back to the sustainability and procurement question. For someone who lives in procurement land, it is a painful space on many an occasion. And I think some of the funders are starting to take a slightly more pragmatic approach in trying to create frameworks that people can join so that organizations don't have to go through the same vetting process. They're part of a framework and list of organizations that can tender and apply. By no means perfect, but I think some of the public sector is starting to recognize, how long drawn out it can be. I think the piece I'd like to sort of add is a lot of the focus is on the spin out, but not on supporting the spin out. So where's the funding for the support once they've spun out? Where's the funding for the scale up program? It's something we think about all the time. We've been working to grow an immersive cluster in the Northeast. It's all well and dandy to have new businesses, and grow the number of new businesses that are building products using immersive tech. But we've got to help them grow beyond that. It's not enough for them to register as a new business, right? So, and there's more limited funding model that focuses on that scaling up stage. And, I think that's where we potentially need a bit more work, particularly for these disciplines and this commercialization. I'm going to come back to your question on risk, actually. So I think risk is growing. The appetite for risk is growing. But I think it comes down to who owns the risk. And so Shera's point of engaging with the private sector, right? If we were to start having more public-private partnership models on that funding, could that risk be with the private sector? Because with public sector funding, it always comes down to what's the value to the public? What's the taxpayers' money doing? What are we accomplishing? So if we could share some of that risk, that could potentially really start to increase that appetite. And I don't think we're anywhere near where we should be if we want to crack some of these grand challenges. And apologies, I am using the word grand challenges, but I fully agree with you. I think there's a space for both. No one is saying that all research has to be applied research. There's absolutely space for both. And there's space for commercialization of both kinds, right? So, but I think for us, cracking that public-private partnership, particularly in this space for commercialization, is going to be really important. Because when I made that comment at the start, it takes a brave funder to take a chance on a model of working that hasn't worked. And we're lucky in the region that we're in that the Combined Authority wants to try pilots. But what if we weren't? Are we going to be in that same model of procurement and go through a long cycle to try something, right? So how do we pass on that, share that risk?
Okay, so lots to talk about there. I think in terms of this, whether rapidity is a good thing, I think, Nikki, you may not think it's rapid, but compared to drug development, social science is actually very quick to market. So I think that's one of the things here. And when we're talking about almost I was being too much of a funder here, we're thinking about how do we get the money out in a year? And one of the things is there's some ready-made ideas out there. In fact, there's hundreds and thousands of them. And commercialization is a way to get them moving earlier on that can potentially address societal issues in the next 5 to 10 years. That's quick in in the slow-moving funder world. So that's the first thing. And I think we absolutely, the USP of research commercialization is the deep research element of it. That's what makes all these ventures attractive to users, to beneficiaries, to funders. And we would be extremely foolish if we did anything to put that at risk. So that's in the speed of funding. Sustainability about social ventures. I suspect we're going to see some interesting stuff in public sector innovation over the next 5 years. I think that's one area that's coming into being interesting now. And certainly there are people talking about things like public sector procurement and change in how that works. And that's not my job, but it's really good to see that happening, and whatever we can do to encourage people and support that development, we will do, because it's so important to our community. Yes, mission-led. So again, it's almost like a pipeline. If we killed off Blue Sky's research, we're effectively killing off our entire ecosystem. It would be an extremely foolish thing to do. I live in KE, translation commercialization land, so it is more at that impact-focused area. It will never be everything that UKRI does. It probably needs to be more of what we do, though. If we think about this purely in a market way, I don't need to incentivize academics to do research. that's what they like doing. I need to incentivise the impact bit. So almost sadly, I can kind of ignore the research bit, go, you're going to do it brilliantly, because we're nowhere near where that's failing. But what we need to do is pull through more impact stuff. And similarly, yes, mission-led or open, we do both. We've had our Healthy Ageing Catalyst and we've had our SHAPE Catalyst, which is, it's agnostic to what area it's working in, and we'll always try and do both. But mission is a good way to get people who might not have thought about doing it into the area. Is the risk appetite too low? Oh, that's a really interesting question, because there's a lot of evidence. So part of my remit is meta-science as well. And one of the things that's very clear in that area is that research funding is conservative with a small c, in that people choose research projects that look kind of like their own research, and they choose people who look kind of like them to do it. So we know that, and that tends towards low risk. Commercialisation is slightly different, and partly because we kind of spread better. Because we're only given 50,000 an award, we can go broad, and we can take that higher risk stuff if it has potential higher impact. So high risk, high reward. I'll tell you an interesting story though. The first thing I did was a Healthy Ageing Catalyst when I joined UKRI, and the first time we ran that, and I can see Tim and Rachel here from Zinc who helped that cohort through, we said we're interested in high risk, high rewards commercialisation projects. What we got was pretty conservative run-of-the-mill research projects, and it took a lot of work on Zinc's behalf for us, working with us, to actually really get people to understand what we meant by high risk. So it kind of comes from both sides. There's conservatism in funders, there's conservatism in academics. So when you ask somebody to do something new, it's really important to show them what that looks like, and it's not so scary.
Great, thank you. We're coming to the end of our time. I'm just going to use Chair's privilege to ask two questions, and you can pick one and answer that, but 30 seconds each before we wrap up. So one is, I've worked, when I've worked sort of outside of the British Academy, I've seen other streams of thinking around things like this which connect up, but I haven't heard mentioned in the sort of discussions so much here. I mean, the world of social enterprise has been something that's been going for 40 years. There's the discussions around impact investment, which you've touched on a little bit today, and also the kind of world of social innovation, Nesta and so on. And it seems to me that are there learnings from those communities that we could kind of take through or build alliances with them? So that's one. Or, if you want to prefer to answer this, how do we change the culture in universities and prepare the next generation? I mean, British Academy runs an early career research network, and we have access to a lot of early career researchers. What could we be doing to help them? So 30 seconds each. I might start with the two funders first, and then, so Tony.
So I'll pick on the change culture question.
Yeah.
So I think it's obviously vital. I think and I think UKRI can play a fantastic role in changing cultures, both of individual researchers, but also institutional ones. So we are doing quite a lot of work with people like NCUB, for example, to look at mobility. But I think it is sort of a structural issue about how do we incentivize and reward and change culture. And yes, money does talk, but it's not all about money. Yeah. Lots of discussion around REF, for example, and about what's the role that the REF can play in incentivizing and rewarding. But it does go much wider than that. Some really interesting conversations around, obviously, portfolio career structure. How do you recognize that? So I think we need to work with universities and other research organizations to understand and think about that reward, I think.
Thank you. Hugh.
Yeah, so I'll take the other question then, just for balance. So what could we learn from other areas? An awful lot. I mean, we were starting from sort of nothing and building it up. I think there will come a point, and certainly Tony's team are doing an awful lot in UKRI to make it a little bit more coherent what we're doing. we recognise that for a while across the organisation we're doing a lot of stuff. And that's often what happens in big organisations. You know, everybody's doing their own programmes, and the difficulty is having the time to step back and go, let's make this a little bit more coherent. So we're doing that and really developing what UKRI does. But there comes a limit to what UKRI can actually do. So research councils can only fund researchers, with a few exceptions. Innovate UK can only really fund businesses, again with a few exceptions. So we'll come to points where there's gaps. So if we talk about social innovation, that's not only going to come from academics, there's going to be other people with good ideas. And at the moment, we struggle to join that up. Now, there are ways of doing it, including co-funding things, where we can start to adapt that programme, and that's really what my team is looking at the moment, about how can we start to build out what we're doing to something broader, something that really starts to take advantage of all the opportunities we can.
Excellent. I'm going to stop you there. But
Yeah, so that was way over 30 seconds, wasn't it? Apologies.
Shera, do you want to go next?
Yeah, okay. I'll answer about the culture. As an early career researcher, I think this is really close to me. I think there should be more of roles that I've been privileged to have, which is working very closely with policy actors and research funders and research councils. So I think more placements, you know, for example, the fact that you're doing the early career researcher network would be massively helpful. And, you know, funding placements not just in councils or policy spaces, but also maybe in industry as well, can be really helpful in terms of giving early career researchers an idea of what that portfolio career looks like as well.
Brilliant.
I'll stop there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ashmita.
And I think we've done 2 and 2, so because I'm going to come to the, to just build on Hugh's comments. I think we need an ecosystem of SHAPE discipline research. And, you know, I think what Aspect's done in building that ecosystem around universities has been great. I think the ARC Accelerator has been fantastic. But beyond that, do people know how to engage with it? Who do we work with? Who do we learn from? And I'm not saying you can pluck ideas from you know, Impact World just immediately. All of that requires us working with people who've been doing it. To your point, working with the people that are in the communities, learning from the communities of practice, but then starting to really build out that ecosystem. And equally, I'd love to see, you know, we've got lots of funding that allows academics to go out into employment world. What about the other way around? Yeah. What about employers and, you know, communities of practice that you're looking to engage with? There's nothing that allows them to come into academia and understand how that works.
Yeah.
I'd love to see that.
It's a nice note to end on, which is let's look much more outward and build those relationships in a kind of wider set of communities. Will you join me in thanking our fabulous panel?
Thank you. Thank you, Ethan.
Well done.